The snow had already begun to fall in thick, relentless sheets when Cora Carmichael's stepmother shoved the worn carpetbag into her arms and told her to get out. And those words echoed in her mind as she stumbled down the frost-covered road with nowhere to go and night coming on fast. Cora was 20 years old, and she had known this day would come eventually, though she had hoped it might be spring or summer when it did. Her father had died 3 months ago, struck down by pneumonia that swept through Oklahoma City in the autumn of 1887, and from that moment her stepmother had made it clear that Cora was no longer welcome in the house she had grown up in. The woman had married her father for his modest savings and the small home on the edge of town, and now that he was gone, she wanted Cora gone too. There was a man she intended to marry, a widower from 2 counties over, and he had no interest in taking on a grown stepdaughter. The wind bit through Cora's threadbare coat as she walked, her fingers already numb around the handle of her bag. She had tried to plead her case, tried to explain that she had nowhere to go, but her stepmother's face had remained hard as stone. The woman had given her exactly what she had come into the marriage with, nothing more. A few dresses, a pair of boots that were wearing thin at the soles, a blanket, and the silver locket that had belonged to her real mother. That was all Cora had in the world now. Oklahoma City was growing rapidly, transforming from a railroad camp into a proper town, but that growth had not reached the outskirts where Cora walked now. The buildings grew sparse, replaced by open prairie that stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of more snow, and the temperature was dropping with every passing minute. Cora knew she needed to find shelter before full dark, but where? She had no friends close enough to impose upon, no relatives within 100 miles. Her father had been a solitary man, and she had inherited that trait. She thought about turning back toward town, perhaps finding work at one of the hotels or boarding houses, but her stepmother had made sure to spread rumors before casting her out. Lies about Cora being lazy, untrustworthy, prone to stealing. It would be nearly impossible to find respectable work now, and winter was the worst time to be searching. Most establishments had already hired their seasonal help. The road curved ahead, following the natural contours of the land, and Cora pulled her coat tighter as the wind picked up. Her fingers had gone from numb to painful, a burning sensation that made her want to cry out, but she bit her lip and kept walking. She had always been strong, had always endured, and she would endure this too somehow. It was then that she heard the sound of hooves behind her, steady and rhythmic against the frozen ground. Cora stepped to the side of the road, not wanting to be in the way, and turned to see who was coming. A lone rider appeared through the curtain of falling snow, sitting tall in the saddle on a dark bay horse. As he drew closer, Cora could make out more details. He was a cowboy by the look of him, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the weather. His face was obscured by shadow and snow, but there was something solid and reassuring about his presence. The rider slowed as he approached, and Cora felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. She was alone, on an empty road, with night coming on, and she knew the dangers that could present, but she also knew she had little choice but to see what he wanted. "Evening, miss," the cowboy said, his voice deep and carrying easily over the wind. He pulled his horse to a stop beside her, and Cora could see his face now. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and eyes the color of summer sky. There was concern in those eyes as he looked down at her. "You should not be out walking in this weather. Storm's getting worse." "I know," Cora said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the cold that was seeping into her bones. "I'm looking for shelter." The cowboy glanced at the carpetbag in her hand, then back at her face, and understanding seemed to dawn in his expression. "You been turned out?" Cora nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. The kindness in his tone was almost harder to bear than her stepmother's cruelty had been. "I'm Carter Reynolds," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles west of here. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You're welcome to shelter there until the storm passes." Cora hesitated. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men she did not know. But what choice did she have? If she stayed out in this storm, she would freeze to death before morning. She studied Carter's face, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent, but saw only genuine concern. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully. "It's no imposition," Carter replied. "I can't in good conscience leave you out here to freeze. Come on, you can ride with me. It'll be faster than walking, and we need to get you somewhere warm." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Cora took it. His grip was strong and steady as he helped her up onto the horse behind him. She settled onto the back of the saddle, her carpet bag clutched in one arm, her other hand gripping Carter's coat to keep her balance. The warmth of his body was immediately noticeable, a stark contrast to the bitter cold around them, and she found herself unconsciously leaning closer. Carter urged the horse forward, and they moved at a steady pace through the snow. The wind seemed to grow stronger, howling across the open prairie with a mournful sound that made Cora shiver. She had never felt so alone in her life, even with this stranger in front of her. Her father was gone. Her stepmother had cast her out, and she had no idea what would become of her now. "What's your name?" Carter asked over his shoulder, his voice cutting through her dark thoughts. "Cora Carmichael," she replied. "Well, Miss Carmichael, you just hold on tight. We'll be at the ranch soon." True to his word, it was not long before Cora could make out the dark shapes of buildings ahead through the swirling snow. The ranch was modest, as Carter had said, consisting of a main house, a barn, and a few smaller outbuildings. Warm light glowed in the windows of the house, promising sanctuary from the storm, and Cora felt a rush of relief so strong it made her dizzy. Carter rode directly to the barn, dismounting quickly and then helping Cora down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the ride, and she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. Carter caught her elbow, steadying her, and she murmured her thanks. "Go on to the house," he said, pointing toward the main building. "Doors unlocked. I'll be right behind you once I've seen to my horse." Cora nodded and made her way through the snow to the house. The wind pushed at her back, as if urging her forward, and she climbed the 3 steps to the porch with shaking legs. The door opened easily under her hand, and she stepped into blessed warmth. The interior of the house was simple but well kept. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table and chairs near the fireplace and a cast-iron stove against one wall. Cora could see 2 doors leading off to what were presumably bedrooms. Everything was neat and orderly, surprising for a bachelor's home. She set her carpet bag down and moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the flames. The warmth was almost painful on her frozen fingers, but it was a good pain, a reminder that she was alive and safe, at least for now. The door opened behind her, bringing a gust of cold air, and then Carter was there, stomping snow off his boots. He removed his hat and coat, hanging them on pegs by the door, and Cora got her first good look at him. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and those striking blue eyes. There was a quiet strength about him, a capability that showed in the easy way he moved and the calluses on his hands. "Let me make some coffee," Carter said, moving toward the stove. "You look half frozen." "Thank you," Cora said softly. "I don't know how to thank you for your kindness, Mr. Reynolds." "Just Carter is fine," he replied, filling a pot with water from a pitcher. "And there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." But Cora knew that was not true. Many people would have ridden right past her, not wanting to get involved, not wanting to take on someone else's troubles. The fact that Carter had stopped, had offered help without hesitation, spoke to his character in a way that words could not. As Carter worked at the stove, Cora took off her thin coat and draped it over a chair near the fire to dry. Her dress beneath was damp from the snow, and she shivered despite the warmth of the room. Carter noticed and disappeared into one of the bedrooms, returning a moment later with a thick quilt. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "Wrap up in this while your clothes dry out some." Cora took the quilt gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and sunshine, clean and comforting. She settled into one of the chairs by the fire, and Carter brought her a cup of hot coffee a few minutes later. The bitter warmth of it spread through her chest, and she felt herself beginning to thaw, both physically and emotionally. Carter sat down across from her, his own cup in hand, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and Cora found herself studying this man who had rescued her. There was something gentle about him despite his obvious strength, a quietness that put her at ease. "If you don't mind my asking," Carter said finally, "what happened? Why were you out on the road in a snowstorm?" Cora looked down at her coffee, feeling a flush of shame heat her cheeks. "My stepmother turned me out. My father died 3 months ago, and she decided she didn't want me around anymore." She heard Carter's sharp intake of breath, but when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "That's a cruel thing to do, especially with winter coming on." "She's marrying again," Cora continued, finding that once she started talking, the words wanted to pour out. "The man doesn't want a stepdaughter, so she gave me what little I owned and told me to leave. I tried to find work in town, but she spread rumors about me, said I was a thief and lazy besides." "That's a lie," Carter said with surprising certainty. Cora looked up at him, startled. "How do you know?" "I can see it in your eyes," he replied. "You've got honest eyes, Miss Carmichael, and your stepmother sounds like a piece of work, if you'll pardon me saying so." Despite everything, Cora felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I won't argue with that assessment." They talked as they drank their coffee, and Cora found herself relaxing in Carter's presence. He told her about his ranch, how he had bought the land 2 years ago and had been working to build it up ever since. He raised cattle and horses, did some breaking and training for other ranchers in the area. It was hard work, he said, but honest work, and he took pride in it. In turn, Cora told him about her life before her father's death. She had kept house for him, had tended a small garden, had done sewing and mending for extra money. She had been content, if not happy, and had hoped that life would continue. But fate had other plans. "You can stay here," Carter said suddenly, interrupting her story. "Until you figure out what you want to do, I mean. There's a spare room and I could use help around the place. I'm not much of a cook, and the house could use a woman's touch. I can pay you a small wage, and you'll have room and board." Cora stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Carter said firmly. "I know you're in trouble through no fault of your own, and I know I've got the means to help. It seems like a simple decision to me." "But what will people say?" Cora asked, thinking of the inevitable gossip. "A single woman living with a single man?" Carter frowned, clearly not having considered that aspect. "I suppose they'll say plenty, but I'm not proposing anything improper, Miss Carmichael. Just offering you work and a safe place to stay. Your reputation will be your own to guard, and I'll do nothing to besmirch it." There was such sincerity in his voice that Cora found herself believing him. And really, what choice did she have? It was either accept his offer or go back out into the storm, an almost certain death. "All right," she said quietly. "I accept. And thank you, Carter. You've saved my life tonight." "You're welcome, Cora," he replied, using her given name for the first time. It sounded right coming from his lips, natural and warm. "Now let me show you to your room, and you can get some proper rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out the details." The spare room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a small window that looked out over the prairie. Carter lit a lamp for her and bid her good night, closing the door softly behind him. Cora changed into a dry nightgown from her carpet bag, her fingers still clumsy with cold, and crawled beneath the heavy quilts. She should have fallen asleep immediately, exhausted as she was, but instead she lay awake listening to the storm rage outside. Her mind kept circling back to Carter Reynolds, to his unexpected kindness, to the way his blue eyes had looked at her with such concern. She barely knew him, and yet he had taken her in without hesitation, had offered her work and shelter when she had nothing. It was more than kindness, she realized. It was decency, a quality that seemed increasingly rare in the world. And as she finally drifted off to sleep, warm and safe for the first time in months, Cora found herself thinking that perhaps fate had not been entirely cruel after all. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world covered in a thick blanket of white. Cora woke to pale sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the main room. She dressed quickly in one of her two good dresses, a dark blue wool that was serviceable if not fashionable, and braided her long brown hair. When she emerged from her room, she found Carter already up and working at the stove. He turned at the sound of her door opening and smiled, and Cora felt something flutter in her chest at the sight of that smile. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Cora admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in." "Stop thanking me," Carter said with a laugh. "You're going to earn your keep, I promise you that. I wasn't lying when I said I'm a terrible cook." As if to prove his point, the bacon in the pan began to smoke, and Carter quickly moved it off the heat. Cora stepped forward without thinking, taking the spatula from his hand. "Let me," she said. "You go see to whatever you need to do outside, and I'll have breakfast ready when you come back in." Carter looked relieved. "You sure you don't mind?" "It's what you're paying me for, isn't it?" Cora replied. "Besides, I'd like to feel useful." He grinned at her and went to pull on his coat and boots. "There's eggs in the basket by the door and bread in the box on the counter. I'll be about 20 minutes. After he left, Cora set about rescuing breakfast and preparing a proper meal. She found the kitchen surprisingly well stocked for a bachelor's home, with flour and sugar and coffee and all the basics. The eggs were fresh, the bacon good quality, and she was able to put together a respectable breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and hot coffee. When Carter came back in, stamping snow off his boots, his eyes widened at the sight of the table set with steaming plates of food. "That looks better than anything I've eaten in months," he said appreciatively. "You sure you're not an angel sent down from heaven?" Cora laughed, a real laugh that felt rusty from disuse. "Just a woman who knows her way around a kitchen. Sit down before it gets cold." They ate together, and Cora found the domesticity of it both strange and comforting. She had not shared meals with anyone since her father's death, and she had forgotten how nice it could be to have company, to have conversation with your food. "What needs doing around here?" she asked as they ate. "Besides cooking, I mean." Carter considered. "Well, there's always mending and washing. The house could use a good cleaning, though I try to keep it tidy. In the spring, there'll be a garden to tend, if you're of a mind to plant one. And honestly, just having someone here to talk to at the end of the day would be nice. It gets lonely out here sometimes." Cora understood that loneliness all too well. "I'll do whatever needs doing," she promised. "You've given me a home when I had none, Carter. That's worth more than wages." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that was deeper than mere gratitude or kindness. Carter held her gaze, and Cora saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. But then he looked away, clearing his throat. "I'd better get back to work," he said, standing. "I've got horses to tend and fences to check after that storm. You make yourself at home here, Cora. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." After he left, Cora sat for a moment in the quiet house, letting his words sink in. Your home now. She had not had a home, not a real one, since her father died. And here was this man, this near stranger, offering her exactly that. She got up and began clearing the dishes, and as she worked, she found herself humming. It was a tune her mother used to sing, half remembered and slightly sad, but it felt right somehow. She washed the dishes and tidied the kitchen, then set about exploring the rest of the house. Carter had not exaggerated when he said it could use a woman's touch. The house was clean but sparse, lacking the small comforts that made a place feel like home. Cora spent the morning cleaning thoroughly, sweeping and dusting and scrubbing. She found spare fabric in a trunk and fashioned simple curtains for the windows. She arranged the furniture to make better use of the space and set out a few small touches, a bowl for fruit, a vase for flowers when spring came. By the time Carter came in for lunch, the house looked transformed. He stood in the doorway, staring around in amazement. "It looks like a real home," he said quietly. I never could make it feel that way on my own." "It just needed some attention," Cora replied, but she was pleased by his reaction. "Now sit down and I'll make us some sandwiches." They fell into a routine over the following days. Carter would rise before dawn to tend to the animals and do the heavy work around the ranch. Cora would make breakfast, then spend her days cooking, cleaning, mending, and generally making the house a more comfortable place to live. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Cora learned that Carter had grown up on a ranch in Texas, that he had come to Oklahoma Territory seeking his own land and his own life. He had worked hard for everything he had scrimped and saved for years to buy his small spread. He wanted to build it into something substantial, a legacy he could pass down to his children someday. "Do you have someone in mind for the mother of those children?" Cora asked one evening, trying to keep her tone light and teasing even as her heart hammered in her chest. Carter had looked at her for a long moment, something intense and unreadable in his blue eyes. "I might," he said softly, "but I'm not sure she'd have me." Cora had not known how to respond to that, and the conversation had moved on to other topics, but she found herself thinking about his words late into the night. The truth was, she was falling in love with Carter Reynolds. It had happened so gradually that she had not noticed at first, but now it was undeniable. She loved the way he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentle way he treated his animals. She loved his kindness and his strength, his quiet competence and his dry sense of humor. She loved the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that made her feel warm all over. But she did not know if he felt the same way. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, never overstepping the bounds of propriety. He treated her as an employee and a friend, nothing more. And Cora was afraid to hope for anything else, afraid that she was reading too much into his kindness. Winter deepened, and the snow continued to fall. Cora had been at the ranch for 3 weeks when the next storm hit, this one even worse than the first. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow fell so thickly that it was impossible to see more than a few feet. Carter had to string a rope from the house to the barn so he would not get lost making the short journey to tend the animals. On the second day of the storm, he came in shaking with cold despite his heavy coat. Cora helped him out of his frozen outer layers and made him sit by the fire with a mug of hot coffee laced with a bit of whiskey. "This is a bad one," he said, his teeth chattering. "Worst I've seen since I came here." "You should not go back out," Cora said firmly. "The animals will be fine for a few hours, and you'll be no good to them if you freeze to death." Carter smiled at her concern. "Yes, madam. I'll wait until the wind dies down a bit." They sat by the fire together, and the enforced idleness seemed to create an intimacy between them. They talked about everything and nothing, and at some point Carter reached out and took Cora's hand. His grip was warm and strong, and Cora felt her heart skip a beat. "Cora," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. "These past few weeks, having you here, it's been the happiest I've been in years, maybe ever. And I know I told you this was just a job, just room and board, but it's become more than that for me. You've become more than that." Cora's breath caught in her throat. "Carter." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Cora. I'm just a cowboy trying to make a life out here. But I've fallen in love with you. Somewhere between that first night when I found you in the snow and this moment right now, I fell completely and utterly in love with you. And I know it's too soon, and I know I have no right to ask, but I have to know. Is there any chance you might feel the same way?" Cora felt tears spring to her eyes, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. "Oh, Carter, I do feel the same way. I've been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your kindness. But it's more than that. So much more." Carter's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have rivaled the sun. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You've made me the happiest man alive," Cora Carmichael. I think you might have done the same for me, she replied, laughing and crying at the same time. He pulled her closer and she went willingly, settling against his chest. His arms came around her, strong and protective, and Cora felt like she had finally come home. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside while they stayed warm and safe together. When Carter finally had to go back out to tend the animals, Cora bundled him up in every warm thing she could find and made him promise to be careful. He kissed her forehead before he left, a sweet, chaste kiss that nonetheless made her entire body tingle with awareness. The storm finally broke the next day, and the world emerged into bright winter sunshine that turned the snow into a field of diamonds. Carter proposed to Cora that evening over a simple dinner of stew and biscuits, going down on one knee right there in the kitchen. I know I should wait, he said, holding her hand and looking up at her with those blue eyes she had come to love so much. I know I should court you properly and give you time. But life is uncertain, Cora, and I don't want to waste a single moment we could spend together. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and help me build a life here? Yes, Cora said without hesitation. Yes, Carter, I will marry you. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen until she was breathless with laughter. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, and Cora felt the world tilt and right itself in a new and wonderful way. They were married in late January in the small church in Oklahoma City. It was a simple ceremony with only a handful of witnesses, including the preacher and his wife, but to Cora it was the most beautiful wedding that had ever been. She wore her best dress, dark green wool with a lace collar she had made herself, and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers that Carter had bought from the general store. Carter wore a new suit, black and formal, and he looked so handsome that Cora could barely breathe when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. His eyes never left her face as she walked toward him, and the love in his gaze was so clear that everyone in the small church must have seen it. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Carter kissed her with such tender passion that Cora felt her knees go weak. She was married now, truly and completely, to this good man who had saved her life and then stolen her heart. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and that night they came together for the first time in the privacy of Carter's room, which was now their room. Cora had been nervous, not knowing quite what to expect, but Carter was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable and cared for. I love you, he whispered against her skin as they lay together afterward. I will love you until the day I die, Cora Reynolds. Cora smiled at the sound of her new name, running her fingers through his dark hair. And I love you, Carter. You saved my life, in more ways than one. We saved each other, he replied, pulling her closer. I was just existing before you came into my life. Now I'm living. The winter passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Cora settled into her role as Carter's wife, and she found that she loved being part of a partnership, working together to build a life. She managed the house and cooked their meals and mended their clothes, but she also helped Carter with the animals when he needed an extra pair of hands. She learned to milk cows and collect eggs and even helped deliver a calf one frigid February morning. Carter taught her to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to handle his gentlest mare. They would ride out together on clear days, exploring the prairie, and Carter would point out landmarks and tell her stories about the land. Cora fell in love with the vast openness of it, the way the sky seemed to go on forever, the beauty of the winter landscape. When spring finally came, bringing warmth and green grass and wildflowers, Cora planted a garden behind the house. She put in vegetables and herbs and even a few flowers, and she tended it carefully, watching with satisfaction as things began to grow. Carter built her a chicken coop and bought her a dozen laying hens, and Cora loved collecting the warm eggs each morning. Life was not always easy. There were hard days when the work seemed endless, when the weather was harsh, or when money was tight. But through it all, Cora and Carter had each other, and that made everything bearable. They would lie in bed at night, tired from the day's labors, and talk about their plans for the future. I want to expand the herd, Carter said one night. Maybe buy some more land if we can save enough. And I want a bigger garden, Cora added. Maybe we could sell vegetables in town for extra money. We could build a bigger house eventually, Carter mused. One with room for children. Cora smiled in the darkness, pressing closer to him. How many children are you planning on, Mr. Reynolds? As many as you'll give me, Mrs. Reynolds, he replied, kissing her temple. A whole houseful, if we're blessed. As spring turned to summer, Cora realized that her monthly courses had not come. At first, she tried not to get her hopes up, knowing that stress and change could sometimes delay such things. But when another month passed with no sign, she began to allow herself to believe. She waited until she was certain before telling Carter, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news with him one evening after dinner, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, spinning her around just as he had when she agreed to marry him. We're going to have a baby, he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. Cora, we're going to have a baby. We are, she confirmed, laughing at his joy. In the late winter, I think, February or early March. Carter immediately became almost comically protective. He did not want Cora to lift anything heavy, did not want her working too hard, fretted over her constantly. Cora found it both endearing and exasperating, having to remind him that she was pregnant, not an invalid. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she said with a smile. I'll be fine, Carter, but I appreciate your concern. Still, she let him pamper her a bit, enjoying the extra attention and care. He would rub her feet when they ached at the end of the day, would bring her water and snacks without her asking, would kiss her rounded belly and talk to the baby growing inside her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Cora bloomed with health. Her figure rounded, and she had to let out her dresses to accommodate her growing belly. Carter thought she had never looked more beautiful, and he told her so constantly, making her blush and laugh. As fall arrived, painting the prairie in shades of gold and orange, they began preparing for the baby's arrival. Cora sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her hands moving with practiced skill. Carter built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was as soft as silk, and placed it in their bedroom where the baby would sleep. They chose names, debating the merits of various options. For a boy, they decided on James, after Carter's father. For a girl, they could not agree, running through dozens of names without finding one that felt quite right. We'll know when we meet her, Cora said finally, or him. The right name will just come to us. Winter came again, and with it, the memories of that night almost a year ago when Carter had found Cora on the road. They spoke of it one evening as they sat by the fire, Cora's belly now round and prominent beneath her dress. If I had ridden past you that night, Carter said quietly, if I had decided it was too much trouble to stop, I would have missed out on the greatest blessing of my life. We were meant to find each other, Cora replied, taking his hand and placing it on her belly so he could feel the baby moving. I truly believe that. Even through all the hardship, we were always heading toward this moment. Do you ever think about your stepmother? Carter asked, about what she did to you? Cora considered the question. Sometimes, she admitted, but mostly I feel sorry for her. She chose bitterness and selfishness, and she'll never know the kind of happiness we have. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful to her. If she had not turned me out, I never would have met you. Carter pulled her close as her belly would allow. I love you, Cora. I love our life together, and I love the child we're bringing into the world. You've given me everything I never knew I needed. And you've given me a home and a family, Cora replied, her eyes bright with tears. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it. That's everything, Carter. That's the whole world. The baby came in early March, during a week of unseasonably warm weather that hinted at the coming spring. Cora's labor started in the morning, and Carter immediately rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had helped deliver half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult. lasting well into the night. Carter paced the main room, listening to Cora's cries from the bedroom and feeling completely helpless. He had faced down angry steers and wild horses without fear, but the thought of Cora in pain, of something happening to her, terrified him beyond measure. But Cora was strong, stronger than even she had known. And when the baby finally came in the early hours of the morning, her cry was loud and healthy. Mrs. Patterson brought the baby out wrapped in blankets, a smile on her weathered face. "You have a son, Mr. Reynolds," she said, placing the baby in Carter's arms, a big, healthy boy. Carter looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and utterly perfect, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. This was his son, his and Cora's, a living symbol of their love. "Can I see her?" he asked urgently. "Is Cora all right?" "She's tired but well," Mrs. Patterson assured him. "Give me just a moment to get her settled, and then you can go in." When Carter finally entered the bedroom carrying their son, he found Cora propped up against the pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling. Her hair was damp with sweat, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but to Carter she had never looked more beautiful. "Come meet your mama," he said softly to the baby, crossing to the bed. He carefully placed the infant in Cora's arms, and she gathered him close, tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect," she whispered, gazing down at their son with wonder. "Carter, he's absolutely perfect." "Just like his mother," Carter replied, sitting on the edge of the bed and putting his arm around both of them. "James Carter Reynolds. Welcome to the world, son." They sat together in the quiet of the early morning, the three of them, and Carter felt a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. This was his family, his wife, and his child, and he would protect them and love them with everything he had for the rest of his life. Mrs. Patterson stayed for a few days to help Cora recover and to teach them how to care for their new baby. Little James proved to be a good baby, crying only when he was hungry or needed changing, and sleeping for long stretches at a time. Cora took to motherhood naturally, nursing him and singing him soft lullabies that her own mother had sung to her. Carter was a devoted father from the first moment. He would hold James for hours, walking him around the house, talking to him in a low, soothing voice. He changed diapers without complaint and would get up in the night to bring the baby to Cora when he was hungry. He was completely smitten with his son, and Cora loved watching them together. As spring progressed and Cora regained her strength, life settled into a new rhythm. They were busier than ever with the ranch work and a baby to care for, but they were happy, deeply, and truly happy. James grew quickly, becoming more alert and interactive with each passing day. His eyes, which had been dark at birth, began to turn blue like his father's, and he had a cap of dark hair that stuck up in all directions. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the prairie, James asleep in Cora's arms, Carter reached over and took her hand. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" he asked, "when I brought you here?" "I said a lot of things," Cora replied with a smile. "Which particular thing are you thinking of?" "You said you didn't know how to thank me," Carter said, "and I told you there was no need for thanks. But I think I'm the one who should be thanking you, Cora. You've made my life complete in ways I never imagined possible." Cora leaned against his shoulder, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "We've made a good life together, haven't we?" "The best life," Carter agreed, "and it's only going to get better." He was right. As the years passed, their life together deepened and grew richer. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose when James was 2, and another son they named Thomas 3 years after that. The ranch prospered, and they were able to buy more land and expand their herd. They built a larger house, one with a room for their growing family, though they kept the original house as a guest cabin. James grew into a strong, capable boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Rose was spirited and clever, with her mother's brown hair and her father's blue eyes. Thomas was the baby, cheerful and affectionate, always getting into mischief. Cora and Carter's love for each other only deepened with time. They had their disagreements, as all couples do, but they always worked through them, always came back to the foundation of love and respect that their marriage was built on. They would steal moments alone when they could, riding out to check on the cattle or sitting on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes on winter evenings when the snow fell softly outside, Cora would think back to that night when she had been cast out into the cold, certain that she was going to die. It seemed like a lifetime ago now, like something that had happened to a different person. She was no longer that frightened, desperate girl. She was Cora Reynolds, wife and mother, co-owner of a successful ranch, a woman who was loved and valued and cherished. And Carter, looking at her across the dinner table surrounded by their children, would think about how close he had come to riding past that night, to missing out on the greatest blessing of his life. He thanked God regularly for the impulse that had made him stop, for the chance to offer help to a stranger who had become his everything. One evening when James was 10, Rose was 8, and Thomas was 5, the family gathered around the fireplace as snow fell outside. It was a scene that had played out countless times over the years, but it never grew old. The children were playing a game on the floor, their laughter filling the room while Cora sat in her rocking chair doing needlework and Carter read the newspaper. "Tell us the story, Papa," Rose said suddenly, looking up from the game. "Tell us about how you found Mama." It was a story the children never tired of hearing, this tale of how their parents had met. Carter set down his newspaper and smiled, pulling Rose onto his lap while James and Thomas moved closer to listen. "It was the coldest winter night I'd ever seen," Carter began, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence the children loved. "Snow coming down so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. I was riding home from town just wanting to get back to a warm fire when I saw someone walking along the road." "It was Mama," Thomas interjected, even though he knew the story by heart. "That's right," Carter confirmed. "It was your Mama, though I didn't know that yet. She was all alone in the storm with nothing but a little carpet bag and a thin coat. And I thought to myself, I can't leave her out here. So I stopped and offered her a ride." "And she was scared of you at first," James added, grinning. "She was," Carter agreed, winking at Cora. "She didn't know if she could trust a strange cowboy, but she was brave, and she decided to take a chance on me." "And then you fell in love," Rose sighed, ever the romantic. "We did," Cora said softly, looking at Carter with all the love she felt shining in her eyes. "Your father saved my life that night, and then he gave me a home and a family and more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." "I'm glad Papa found you, Mama," Thomas said seriously. "Otherwise we wouldn't be here." "That's very true," Cora replied, setting down her needlework to pull Thomas into a hug. "And I'm very glad he found me too. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Cora and Carter stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the snow-covered prairie. Carter's arms were around Cora's waist, and she leaned back against his chest, perfectly content. "Do you think she ever wonders what became of me?" Cora asked quietly. "My stepmother, I mean." "I don't know," Carter replied honestly. "Does it matter?" Cora thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I suppose it doesn't. I have everything I need right here." "So do I," Carter murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Cora Reynolds, today, tomorrow, and always." "And I love you, Carter Reynolds," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "You are my home and my heart." They kissed then, a kiss that held all the love and passion and commitment of their years together. And as the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, Cora thought about how sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most beautiful ones. Being cast out into that storm had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning of love, of family, of a life richer and fuller than she had ever imagined. Years continued to pass in this way, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. James grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong with those same blue eyes and quiet confidence. He took on more and more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside Carter with the easy partnership that came from years of practice. Rose proved to have her mother's quick mind and capable hands. She helped Cora in the house and garden, but she also loved the ranch work, often joining her father and brother with the horses. She had a special gift for gentling even the most spirited animals, and Carter began letting her help with the training. Thomas, the baby, remained cheerful and affectionate even as he grew. He loved school and books, and while he helped with the ranch work, Cora and Carter could tell his heart might lead him in a different direction someday. They were determined to support whatever path their children chose, wanting them to be happy above all else. When James was 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emma, who Cora immediately loved. Rose at 16 was starting to attract the attention of young men, though she claimed to have no interest in romance yet. And Thomas, at 13, was more interested in his studies than anything else. Cora and Carter watched their children grow with pride and just a touch of wistfulness, knowing that soon their babies would be starting lives of their own. But they took comfort in the fact that they had raised their children well, had given them a foundation of love and values that would serve them throughout their lives. One summer evening, as Cora and Carter sat on the porch swing they had installed years ago, watching fireflies dance in the warm air, they reflected on how far they had come. 20 years, Carter said wonderingly. It's been 20 years since I found you in that snowstorm. 20 of the best years of my life, Cora replied, squeezing his hand. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I was that you came along when you did. It wasn't luck, Carter said firmly. It was fate. We were always meant to find each other, Cora. I believe that with everything in me. Cora smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. At 40, she was still beautiful. Her face lined with laugh lines and her hair showing threads of silver, but her eyes were as bright and warm as ever. Carter, at 45, had aged well too. His dark hair graying at the temples, but his body still strong from years of hard work. What do you think the next 20 years will bring, Cora asked. Grandchildren, I hope, Carter replied with a grin. James and Emma will probably marry soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if Rose finds someone once she decides to look, and Thomas will do something amazing whatever he puts his mind to. And we'll still be here, Cora added, together, just like always. Together, Carter agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. That's all that matters. James and Emma did marry the following spring, in a lovely ceremony that filled Cora's heart with joy and made Carter cry, though he tried to hide it. They built a small house on the far end of the Reynolds property, and James continued to work the ranch with his father while Emma proved herself to be as capable and hard-working as her new mother-in-law. A year later, Cora and Carter became grandparents when Emma gave birth to a baby girl they named Grace. Holding her first grandchild in her arms, Cora was overwhelmed with emotion, remembering how she had felt when James was born, and marveling at the continuation of their family line. Carter was a doting grandfather, spoiling Grace shamelessly and spending every free moment with her. He would walk her around the ranch, pointing out the animals and telling her stories just as he had done with his own children. Watching him with his granddaughter, Cora fell in love with him all over again. Rose eventually did find love, with a young teacher who came to work at the school in Oklahoma City. His name was William, and he was gentle and kind and completely devoted to Rose. They married when Rose was 19 and moved into town, though they visited the ranch often. Rose continued to help with the horses, riding out from town whenever she could to work with the animals she loved. Thomas, as Cora and Carter had suspected, pursued his education. He attended a university back east, studying law, and eventually returned to Oklahoma to open a practice. He never married, content with his work and his books, but he remained close to his family and visited the ranch regularly. As Cora and Carter moved into their 50s, they began to slow down just a bit, though they were still active and involved in the ranch. James had effectively taken over most of the day-to-day operations, and Carter was content to let him, taking on more of an advisory role. Cora still kept house and tended her garden, though Emma helped her now. The two women working side by side just as Cora had once worked with Carter. They had 4 grandchildren now, Grace and her younger brother John from James and Emma, and twin girls from Rose and William. The house was always full of laughter and noise when the grandchildren visited, and Cora and Carter loved every chaotic minute of it. One winter evening, nearly 30 years after the night they met, Cora and Carter sat together by the fireplace in the home they had built together. The house was quiet, the grandchildren having gone home earlier that day after a visit. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after decades of marriage, watching the flames dance. "Do you ever regret it?" Cora asked suddenly. "Taking me in that night? Your life would have been much simpler without me." Carter turned to look at her, surprise and something like hurt in his eyes. "Regret it? Cora, taking you in that night was the single best decision I ever made. My life would have been simpler, maybe, but it also would have been empty. You gave me everything, love. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. You made me whole." Cora felt tears prick at her eyes, even after all these years moved by his words. "I just wanted to make sure you knew how much I appreciate everything you've given me. You saved my life, Carter. Not just that night, but every day since. You showed me what love really means." "We saved each other," Carter replied, pulling her close. "That's what love is, Cora. It's saving each other every single day in ways big and small." They sat together in the firelight, 2 people who had built a beautiful life from the ashes of hardship and despair. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, just as it had been falling that night 30 years ago. But inside they were warm and safe, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the form of photographs on the walls, handmade quilts draped over chairs, toys forgotten by visiting grandchildren. "Tell me again," Cora said softly. "Tell me how you knew." "Knew what?" Carter asked, though he thought he understood. "That you loved me. That first night or the first week, whenever it was. How did you know?" Carter was quiet for a moment, thinking back across the years. "I think I knew from the moment I saw you standing there in the snow," he said finally. "Something about you just spoke to my soul. But I knew for certain when I came home after showing you to your room that first night. I sat out here alone, and the house felt different. It felt like a home for the first time since I'd built it. That's when I knew you were meant to be here, meant to be with me. I fell in love with you slowly," Cora confessed. "Or at least I thought it was slowly, but maybe it was always there from the beginning. And it just took me time to recognize it for what it was. You were so kind, so gentle, and strong at the same time. You made me feel safe for the first time since my father died." "You made me feel needed," Carter replied. "Not for what I could do or what I could provide, but just for being me. That's a rare gift, Cora." They stayed up late into the night, talking about their life together, remembering the good times and even some of the hard times, because those had shaped them too. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and all they had built, about their hopes for the future. "I want to grow old with you," Cora said as they finally made their way to bed. "I want decades more of this, Carter, of us." "We will," Carter promised, pulling her close as they settled into bed. "We have years and years ahead of us, love. I'm not going anywhere." And they did have years ahead of them. They grew old together, their hair turning white and their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They saw their grandchildren grow up and begin having children of their own, making them great-grandparents. The ranch passed fully to James, though Carter remained involved as long as he was able, unable to completely give up the work he loved. They celebrated their golden wedding anniversary surrounded by their family. 3 generations gathered to honor the love that had started on a snowy winter night so long ago. Looking around at all the faces, at the family they had created together, Cora and Carter were overwhelmed with gratitude. When Carter was 70 and Cora 65, they finally began to truly slow down. Carter's joints ached in the mornings, and Cora tired more easily than she once had. But they were content, spending their days in each other's company, taking gentle walks around the property, sitting on the porch and watching the world go by. One evening in late autumn, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, they sat together on the porch swing. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and Cora pulled a shawl around her shoulders. "Do you remember?" Carter asked, gesturing to the horizon where the first snowflakes of the season were beginning to fall. "I remember," Cora replied, knowing exactly what he meant. "How could I forget? That night changed everything." "Your stepmother thought she was punishing you," Carter mused. "Thought she was casting you out into misery and hardship, but instead she gave you the greatest gift. She put you on that road so I would find you." "I used to wonder what became of her," Cora admitted. "But I stopped wondering years ago. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except this, except us and the life we built together." "I love you, Cora Reynolds," Carter said. The same words he had spoken countless times over the decades, but they never grew old or lost their power. "And I love you, Carter Reynolds," Cora replied, leaning against him as the snow began to fall more heavily. "My rescuer, my love, my home." They sat together as darkness fell, and the snow covered the world in white. Two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful and lasting. They had taken hardship and transformed it into joy, had turned a chance meeting on a winter road into a love story for the ages. Inside the house, the fire burned warm and bright. In town and on neighboring ranches, their children and grandchildren went about their lives, secure in the foundation of love that Cora and Carter had built. And on the porch, two people who had loved each other for more than 50 years sat together in the snow, grateful for every moment they had been given, knowing that their love would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in the hearts and lives of their family. The snow fell softly, peacefully, nothing like the desperate storm of that long-ago night. But it served as a reminder of where they had started, of how far they had come. And as Cora and Carter sat together in the twilight of their lives, they knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every struggle, every moment of pain had been worth it to bring them to this place, to this life they had built together. Their love story had begun with an act of kindness on a snowy winter night, and it would end the same way, with two people choosing each other every single day, committed to the vows they had made and the life they had created. It was a love story as enduring as the prairie itself, as constant as the changing seasons, as true as the stars that wheeled overhead in the vast Oklahoma sky. And it was exactly the kind of love story that deserved to be told and remembered, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the transformative nature of true love. From that desperate night when a stepmother's cruelty had sent a young woman out into a deadly storm, to this peaceful evening 50 years later when an old couple sat together watching the snow fall, it had been a journey of love, of building, of creating something beautiful from nothing. As the years continued to pass, Carter and Cora remained devoted to each other until the very end of their days. When Carter passed away at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep with Cora holding his hand, she mourned him deeply, but also celebrated the incredible life they had shared. She lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of her cowboy who had rescued her from the snow and given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. When Cora finally passed at the age of 70, she was buried beside Carter on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their grave was marked with a simple stone that read, "Carter and Cora Reynolds, together forever." And it became a place where their descendants would come to remember the love story that had started their family, the chance meeting that had changed everything. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, and with it the story of how it all began. Great-great-grandchildren would sit around fires on winter nights and hear about the snowstorm, the cowboy, and the woman he saved, and they would understand that they owed their very existence to that act of kindness on a cold winter night in 1887. It was a love story that transcended time, that spoke to the best parts of human nature, to the way love could transform lives and create legacies that lasted for generations. It was the story of her stepmother cast her out when winter set in, the cowboy found her and took her home, and it was a story of hope and love and the beautiful things that could grow from the smallest acts of kindness. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the hardship that had brought them together, but the love that had sustained them through 50 years of marriage and continued to inspire their family long after they were gone. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life were really just the beginning of something wonderful, and that true love, when it was found, was worth holding on to with everything you had. The Reynolds family continued to thrive on that Oklahoma land generation after generation, but they never forgot the foundation that Cora and Carter had laid. Every winter, when the first snow fell, they would tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of two people who had loved each other completely and built something beautiful together. And in that way, Cora and Carter Reynolds lived on forever, their love story an eternal testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the transformative magic of true love.